Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, and after much anticipation, I can finally once again say, and joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Nick, it's been quite a while. You've probably traveled nearly the entire length of the globe, but you are back.
Yeah, it has. I think I worked out. So after Madrid, the Madrid event we ran in November, I have literally circumnavigated the world. In fact, I've gone further than that. So from Madrid to Jamaica, then up from Jamaica through the US, then across from the west coast of US to Australia, and then to get back to where I'm now in Sweden, you go the other way, you keep going the other way. So you literally are going around. I think I've done actually a bit of an M shape somehow, or maybe a bit of a V shape. And I had to tell my son, like, you've actually you've gone around the entire world. Do you understand how mental that is? And he's like, yeah, it's all right. But I didn't see an echidna in the wild, did I? Oh, okay, fine. These kids are hard to keep happy. But yeah, it's been a lot of time in planes, 37 hours of travel from Jamaica to Australia, then 34 hours on the way back. So 70 hours of travel time to do a little holiday to see the family. Unfortunately, my carbon footprint isn't all that good at the moment, but it's been definitely a long overdue trip. 7.5 years since I've been back to Australia,
Jeez.
Which is nearly half of my time out of the country. COVID and other things got in the mix there. But glad to go back home and now residing on the west coast of Sweden. So it's been a big few weeks, that's for sure.
I mean, in Carl's defense, if I traveled 37 hours to Australia and didn't see a kangaroo, at his age, I could understand why that would be disappointing.
Well, don't worry. He did get to see some kangaroos. He got some good photos and stuff with them. But yeah, he was pretty grumpy that he didn't get to see. We kind of saw a wombat in the dark in a zoo, but it's like nocturnal, right? So they had it so dark. It's like they're promising us it's there somewhere. I'm like, not sold on this. We spent more time in zoos than we did anywhere else. But no, it was a good time. Thankful that planes these days have, this is making me sound very old, but I remember the days of flying long haul and you had one small screen in the hallway, in the aisleway for everyone to watch. And having choice and having kids having their own options makes it much easier 37-hour trip than I would have expected. So glad to get through the other side of it, though, and really start getting into the crux of what's going on in the wild world of sports media.
Oh, man, Nick, so much has been going on. But one of the things I was going to ask you just sort of kind of what some of your experiences were. Because I know for me, like, obviously being in the UK, I watched a lot of Sky Sports. I get my NFL via DAZN. So going back home, got to watch sports in ways I don't normally do. I know I'm begging for YouTube to launch YouTube TV outside of just the US, but I had a really great time doing YouTube TV back in the States. One of the things was interesting was the multi-screen option. I know it's not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's currently not really anything I can think of in the UK that offers that from a sporting perspective. So we were able to watch the NFL playoffs alongside NCAA college bowl football games. So it wasn't even just, the same sports properties, it was different sports properties that you could multi-screen. And the other one I found really interesting, Nick, and I would want to know the business behind it. So YouTube does ads, right? And we all know that's kind of the business, but YouTube TV, it's sort of this linear idea. And what I found really interesting, Nick, is when you're watching it, say you're watching the NFL playoffs and it went to a TV break, as it always does, it gave you the option. It said, skip ad to watch a relaxing video after like 15 seconds. And you would click it and it would just go to this video of like, this very scenic Swedish looking lake with the sunset playing music and being like, oh, if you're interested in a YouTube premium subscription, click here. And I just thought it was really interesting because like I would have thought whoever the advertisers are would have wanted their advertisement to be played, not YouTube giving you the option to skip it to a relaxing video. I just don't know how the business end of it works, but I found it really interesting because like I've never experienced anything like that.
That is quite an interesting approach. I think what that does, it allows the advertiser and the platform to measure engagement more effectively. So how much people are actually paying attention in those ads, and is your ad so bad they want to turn off quickly and watch a still of a lake or grass growing? But I think there's some real merit to that. And look, when the ad business, we want to do a lot more of that this year because advertising is such a growing part of the sports economy. But the different ways ads are served, for example, YouTube's built themselves basically on the 5-second ad. If you think about it, right, and they are allowing themselves to be able to measure how many conversions that And conversions can be everything from conversions to clicking through to buying, but also conversions to watching the full ad to immerse themselves into the product that is being broadcast or presented. So there is some value in that. I remember what infuriated me hugely was this is going a bit off piece, but when basically when the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, I went, all right, I need to watch news here. I want to get my head around what's going on. So I went onto my Samsung operating system platform and started watching CNN. And what they did is every ad break, because obviously CNN's a huge advertising business in the US, but they don't broadcast any of the ads outside of America. And so all they did was have this same on the loop ad or music playing every single ad break. And they tell you what, there's a lot of ad breaks in American TV for those that aren't in the US. It drove me nuts. It drove me to the point that I didn't want to watch it. I would rather watch stupid American ads like State Farm ads and all those that are broadcast. I've seen countless examples of them. Than I would watching the same ad over and over again or the same repeat. Same with ESPN's ads they run. I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but outside the US, it's just the same. ESPN house ads basically playing over and over because they're not allowed to, I guess, broadcast commercial partners on those. Infuriating. So I would pay for them to broadcast ads. That's probably a first that everyone's heard, but I absolutely would rather watch American ads being played on TV than I would watching the same ad over and over again. So I definitely sympathize with you there.
Did you have any experiences, anything you came across in Australia or anything that you've come across since Sweden, although you've been to Sweden multiple times before?
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing in Australia that stands out, obviously I flew over just as the Foxtel DAZN deal's been announced. Obviously you've covered that with Steve on the pod, so we won't spend too much time covering it at this stage. But what was interesting for me was anecdotally to ask around, oh, have you heard about this? And most people who have Foxtel didn't have a clue what I was talking about to begin with, or definitely didn't know who DAZN was. But I think the most interesting sort of a reminder, I suppose, of the Australian market is that a lot of the top sports is on free-to-air TV still and being monetized through advertising and alike. So Channel 9 and Channel 7 have the bulk of the top tier. What was it? The cricket and the tennis was basically the biggest sporting events happening. So Australia playing on cricket against India was a huge event. It's always on. It's on TV all day long. And then Channel 7, again, this is the free-to-air TV serving a mix of sports and entertainment for everyone. Then had cricket in the evening. So they had the Australia-India test match, which is huge because India and Australia are probably the top two nations in the world at the moment. And then in the evening, they had the 2020 cricket, the Australian version of the Big Bash going on. So it was 9, 10, 11, whatever, 13 hours of cricket basically happening through the entire day on those channels. It just shows I guess, how important sports is to that ecosystem. And with the tennis as well, they have playing countless tennis matches on main free-to-air channel there. So just the immersion of that and the fact that the sports does really take over society there, particularly in January, it was a big reminder for me that sort of stuff doesn't really happen in markets like the UK and in the US as well, because we're so many different choices of what we want to consume. But in markets like Australia, it's everywhere. So that was just an interesting reminder for me, just how immersive live sports is in a market like that.
Yeah, well, I just remember Steve talking about it, and I was like, we could use more of our governments getting involved, like Australia, and reserving the rights for sports to be on free to air. You know me, Nick. I love a little free to air. And what do we need to do to get that petition, to get that moving?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. Let's not open a can of worms now to talk through that. But yeah, I completely agree with you. One thing I'm waiting for, so we're in our new place in Sweden, and we haven't got the linear channels yet. So we're trying to get that sorted because, I don't know, we either need the cable or something connected to the local area. But currently the big sporting events at the moment that I've been told I need to watch are Skidskytte, which is basically cross-country skiing with, I think it's called biathlon, which is with the gun shooting. Yeah. That's a big thing my in-laws are into.
Sounds very American with guns.
They start rattling off all the, all the competitors and how well they're doing, and obviously very patriotic to the Swedes and what they're doing. It's all very European. And there's also handball. Handball's massive here as well. So I've watched quite a bit of handball. Getting into that, and I think it's a good sport for the kids to play, so they can throw. They like throwing balls at Meacham, so they can throw balls on the net.
I like handball. I've always been shocked it's not grown in America, given baseball and quarterbacks and things like that. And it's obviously not the same, but like it's not totally different from basketball or lacrosse in terms of how you're sort of going up and down. Like I've been amazed it never took off in America because I loved it in gym class. It's just it doesn't have a footing.
When I tried to tell people in Australia that I was getting into handball a little bit in Sweden, they kept thinking, I don't know if you had it at school, but they had it's the handball where you play with a tennis ball, where you play like, we played it at school loads. It was like the sport you played at school. Basically, you play with a tennis ball and the ball has to bounce in your side of the box and then it has to go on. You're playing it against the other person against you.
We called it Foursquare, but yeah.
Foursquare. Okay. So that was a huge sport for us. And I remember we would have games where there would be like 14 or 16 squares. And so it would be, and that was at every school I went to, and I went to a few in Australia. So that was the big thing. Everyone kept thinking I was talking about that sort of handball, not because that's what they call handball. In Australia, they call it European handball, which is the other version. So I'm definitely keen to. I might even pick it up. I used to love playing it at school when I had a chance to play it, but I don't know if they would accept 40-plus-year-olds in any local teams anytime soon. We'll see.
They always need a goalkeeper, right?
I don't want to go. Have you seen? Watch some highlights. They throw the ball over 100 kilometers an hour sometimes, and you see them cop it in the face. I'll be wearing a big, massive face shield like an ice hockey mask if I have to play that one.
Fine. Well, Nick, like you said, there's been quite a bit of news, some of it more recent, and we'll go ahead and jump into because I know people have been waiting for us to get back into the sports news. And the first one we'll start with kind of two stories, but same business. And you've posted about both of them on LinkedIn for anybody that wants to engage in the discourse because there's definitely people with some strong opinions on it, both centered around DAZN. We've spoken about DAZN, Steve and I, kind of talking about what they're doing in Australia with Foxtel, some of the rumors looking like they're going to get some funding from PIF. But now it appears as though kind of the original sort of main shareholder who started it all off, Glenn Blathenick. We can keep that in, Chris, our podcast editor, just so people have a good laugh at it. But it sounds like, Nick, he's going to put in another $827 million of investment. And there were some other numbers kind of talking about revenue growth or losses, subscriber growth, and, different people saying, is he doing this because it's the right time and he's optimistic about the business? Is he doing it because he's already in so deep that he's got no choice but to keep pushing? But Nick, what are your thoughts on this further investment?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I've been following DAZN's journey since they basically began, and I actually remember a few years ago I don't know, was bored one night at home and I read their 100 pages of accounts. And that's from then I started to follow them more and more. And I actually haven't read theirs this time around, but it's important to know when we start sharing the numbers that are publicly displayed in companies' accounts, they are basically for the previous financial year because there's such a delay in when they're required to be posted. So that little caveat always hangs when I look at what the numbers are showing because there could be some growth here that we can't see because there's been all sorts of deals, all sorts of announcements that DAZN have made that we aren't showing up in these figures, aren't showing up in these. It could be a rights deal, it could be a new acquisition, etc. So we have to when we look at these numbers that are shared, marry up what has happened 18 months ago, 2 years ago, in some instances or close to what has happened today, and try and piece the pieces together to determine whether or not they are on the right trajectory. And what's always struck me with these numbers that have been shared, and I've shared some numbers over the years that have come out, is the losses aren't getting any lower. They still seem, after this investment into Foxtel, they still seem to be very focused on growing and investing in the growth, which is an important piece of this because one of the things they were saying a few years ago was we're going to be profitable by, I think it was the end of 2024 was what they said. Maybe it was 2025, but I'm pretty sure it was 2024. In their recent announcements, they said they are profitable in most of their top 10 markets, whatever that means. But being profitable in a market of a business this scale, it's unclear what that really means because that can just be an accountancy thing. So that's the skeptic in me. The positives, I will say, that's great if they are in their more mature markets being profitable, yet there still seems to be a huge billion-dollar plus void that they have to overcome. And I've been waiting for years to see that come, and it hasn't come yet. But then if you marry up all those losses that we keep seeing published and the fact they've made these investments, including the FIFA Club World Cup, I should say, and the Foxtel, I'm really at a loss as to where we go from here, because it feels like you don't make you can't make that Foxtel investment and just sit still unless it's an incredible opportunity, because obviously you guys covered it, but Foxtel is not just a sports product, it's a sports and entertainment business. Maybe they will sell off some of the entertainment components of the Foxtel offering, but it's a fully fledged, really matured pay TV offer that is as comprehensive as in any market that I follow. So what's the next step? Is it to continue to now mop up some of these other businesses of a similar nature and then build that $200 billion business that they are saying they want? Or is it just being opportunistic for and just picking and cherry picking those opportunities? I'm a little bit lost of where they go from here. And I say that because with the Foxtel deal, they've had to get, for the reports, I think it was from the FT, that they have to get a bank loan to pay for a part of that business. Now, that's not uncommon. That's quite normal. But that means you've got to be servicing the debts that you're paying to buy that business. I'm not sure about how lucrative Foxtel was. I can't remember. I did post about this, but I was on holiday at the time. I think they are loss-making at the moment because of the competitive nature of the sports market in Australia. So that means they're going to be taking on more debt issues. That means they have to service that before they can start putting themselves into a profitable position. So if therefore, the final point on this is if they want to keep growing in this way by acquisition and building this behemoth media business, that means they need a lot more money, because the bank's not just going to keep loaning it to them. So where's that going to come from? Is it Blavatnik going to keep finding another billion here and there to throw into the mix? Or is it going to be from some Saudi investment firm? Or is it going to be by IPOing? And they're showing the signs of this and they want to IPO sooner rather than later. But that's been very quiet on their front. So I've got loads of questions about what they're doing. I'm not saying they are doing it wrong. They have weaved, I don't want to say pivoted, but weaved from direction to direction, where we talked about share of wallet opportunities around betting and other e-commerce and stuff that was going to be a game changer. That's gone quiet. We talked about the profitability aspect. That's gone a bit quiet. I sit here now, I'm not really sure where they're going, and I thought I did before.
So since 2016, it says Len Blavatnik has now invested $6.7 billion. So if you had to put it quickly, Nick, is he doing this most recent investment because he's confident in where the direction's going with some of the moves that you talked about with Foxtel or the Club World Cup with FIFA? Or is it just he's got to keep pushing forward?
I mean, it's a great question. I think I asked the same question 2 years ago, when it was probably up to about $4 billion or $5 billion, and now it's up to nearly $7 billion. It's shocking to me that there isn't they haven't achieved a significant investment from somewhere to maybe de-risk Blavatnik's position and to help them grow. It seems like he's either really keen to own the majority of that share base that he's held onto, or that they can't get the valuation from those other investors that they think it's worth. So how much money has he got to spend? I think he's got quite a few billion still in the bank to throw at this. And we did see some reports that Surge, the PIF Sports Specific Investment Fund, might be putting up to north of $1 billion into it. But again, we've seen the losses. That funds maybe 1 year's worth of business, and then that money's gone. So I would want, if I was them, obviously want to see that money turn into something. At some stage, Blavatnik's going to have to stop throwing money at this. But if, you see some of the people who've posted or on the comments in mine, they're reputable, pretty reputable names. Jochen Losch is a very well-renowned sports media rights expert of decades in the industry. He was quick to point out that this is one of these things that is a risky game basically to play. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Go check out his comments on my feed if you want. But basically, the crux of it is it's a very risky game to play. Just keep throwing money at it and hopefully eventually it solves something. It may pay off, and it may pay off incredibly well. But we're still waiting to see that sign, just that little tell that, all right, they're heading in the right direction. And that might be just because they're still playing that long game. They're willing to throw more money at it, build a bigger pie, and then make the move, which is either sell to a bigger media business or IPO it. But we haven't seen any of those signs yet.
Going slightly off-piste, it seems like Netflix has had success, and we are going to talk about Netflix later, but Netflix seems to be having success based off what they've done with WWE and the NFL. We've seen YouTube enter the space in the way they haven't done before. We know, or we assume, Amazon's going to do something or do more. Is DAZN's position weakened by the fact if we think back to when they first started, Netflix wasn't really a competitor, YouTube wasn't really a competitor in that space? Does this make it even more difficult for them to reach their end goal now that some of these big tech companies seem to be taking more confident steps into sports?
Oh, that's a great question, Chris. I think there's a lot of things over time since they launched, which has been thrown at them, which has made it more difficult than perhaps they expected, and that's including the difficulties around subscriptions and subscription fatigue, the challenges of monetizing football, and some of the challenges the entire football industry is seeing around adoption and interest in some of the other European football markets. It does feel like we're getting finally to a place where big tech is making some bigger moves. And would it be an obvious marriage or a partnership to see Netflix make a move for DAZN and just mop up all those rights and wrap it into the Netflix business? Could be. It could be. There's a lot of trickiness around that approach. So yeah, I think it does make it more difficult. If you've ever got a situation where an incumbent, which in our DAZN used to be always the disruptor, but in some markets they are now the incumbent, there becomes more competitors to that landscape. So you've got to go, right, we've got to bid and compete with all these other properties, other people. Now, I think that the runway they've got here is that Netflix seems to be very focused on US, understandably so, or global. And in terms of global en masse, they haven't seemed to be too focused on going after single countries of mid to low tier sizes yet. That might come in the future. And that's where DAZN for now and a bunch of other platforms still have a nice sweet spot to navigate and grow their businesses until as and when Netflix might decide to pull that trigger. And that's when Netflix has to make a call on how they approach that, whether it is by acquisition, whether it is just by starting to buy one by one, getting more rights and more rights. And now they're going to be rumored, no doubt, with every major piece of rights in the market over the next 5+ years, given the numbers we've just seen and how successful they've been in driving acquisition in their latest figures, and that the audiences they're delivering, in the biggest media market. I mean, people will say that they're not as impressive or they're not as good as FTA or free to air, but they're pretty close for a streaming product. It's pretty incredible. So they are definitely heading in the right direction, and there's no doubt they're going to make more and more moves into sports.
Well, we will jump into Netflix in a bit, but we're going to stick with DAZN for one other story. And you talked about one of those factors that's seemingly making business more difficult for them is sort of the stagnation we're seeing in the football market. And one of the deals that we seemingly followed, I mean, like feels like a year because it goes back to Sports Pro Madrid in 2023. Was it Ben Morel who came out and spoke on behalf of Ligue 1 as they knew those deals were upcoming? And I think it was nearly 12 months before we got some conclusion. And, Canal Plus pulled out and I think ended up having to settle with DAZN as part of that deal to get some international broadcast. And it seems like only a couple months into that partnership, DAZN is already seeking to renegotiate its 400 million euro per year deal, essentially saying that the number of subscriptions is far below what is needed for profitability. So, we've talked about this story a bit, Nick, but now that it's in progress, it does not seem as though the sentiment has necessarily improved despite finally having a deal in place.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, that it just the hits keep on coming for Ligue 1 in that marketplace. I'm skeptical that they will make the call of pulling out of that marketplace. I think they have some. I think the original, what I saw, some of the people who, the beauty of LinkedIn, particularly on social media, is that you have some really knowledgeable people who are quick to raise some comments and give some insight, both online publicly and also privately. But basically, there was exit clauses in place, but that was done apparently by clubs to have the exit clause. So in case another deal came along, they weren't happy with the DAZN coverage, they had a way of getting out and potentially giving it to other broadcasters. Well, it sounds like DAZN is now using that lever for themselves to threaten to pull out and maybe try and negotiate an even better deal again. And I'm pretty sure we're sitting here and there aren't a lot of other established media businesses in that market ready to make that major investment, as we haven't seen in pretty much every European market. So DAZN has gone from having to really work hard to basically secure some of those major rights in a lot of those Western European markets to now being in a bit of a driver's seat when there's competitive tension, or there's a lack of tension, I should say, in the marketplace. So I would predict that they stay with Ligue 1. They've been very quick to mop up those quote unquote premium rights in those markets, and I think they'll continue to do so when opportunities present themselves. But why not try and pull a lever to try and get an even better deal? What's the worst that can happen? Because there's no one going to be lining up to outbid DAZN's investment into those rights anytime soon, from what we've seen and what we've heard.
Yeah, and it'll be tough because we've talked about, although we are a sports business podcast and we're very specifically talking about sports media rights, this very much does impact the clubs and teams. And we know that there's a number of clubs in France that are possibly moving into administration, having issues with PSR, and they're saying between the clubs, this is expected to be a combined loss of 1.2 billion euros for those clubs. And, maybe if you're PSG, you'll be fine, you'll be okay. But, they are a very bloated, top-heavy league that does have serious consequences for the whole thing. And then you almost into this vicious cycle of, does the product get worse? If the product gets worse, you can't sell for more money. And it does seem like a tough place to be in.
I do think your point about PSG is an interesting one. My view on that basically is, PSG will be best placed as long as the Qatari money's there to keep going and keep dominating the league for many years to come. But they are very much the reason why the league is not performing well, because they brought in all those stars, but either bought them from other French clubs or bought them from out, and then they've let them go, and the league is just void of that superstar fan base that they used to have. Yeah, the superstar fan base, basically the fans that we've seen in other markets, that fans are following athletes much more than clubs in many instances, not exclusively. And so when Neymar and Messi and all those others are disappearing out of the league, they are following those stars to those other leagues, particularly when the league quality isn't as high, which I didn't expect that to be such a problem. I thought like a domestic league would be able to handle that, but it just took the edge off the arrow, so to speak. It just took the quality out of that league, where French fans have other leagues they can watch. And I'd love to see some stats and data. If anyone has any, please share it with us as to how fandom has changed in that market over the last 10 years or so. But my guess is it's weaker than it ever has been. And these clubs that have been, and the CVC deal, which is all built around media rights growth, has absolutely hamstrung the entire league and every team associated with it, particularly those that have received investment from a major investor of some ilk, particularly from the US market. So a really, really tough landscape. I don't see how it can get itself into a good place in the near future without a lot of blood being lost along the way.
Well, this story seemingly always wants our attention, and it no doubt will continue to be a story we follow as we get more information. But circling back around to Netflix, we talked a little bit about them, or at least I brought them up in the DAZN conversation. But they have released some numbers, and positive for them. It said in Q4 of 2024, they gained 18.9 million global subscribers, bringing them up to just north of 300 million. Revenue rose by 16% year over year, and overall is really positive. And I guess what's interesting in that time frame is we saw their NFL Christmas games, we saw the debut of the WWE launch, we also had the Jake Paul Mike Tyson boxing match. So I guess for me, Nick, kind of the question I come with: positive news for Netflix, good for them, particularly maybe if you're a shareholder as well, because they did talk about shares have done quite well in the stock market. But I guess the curious question is, Nick, how much of this is directly benefited to the sports? And then I guess the follow-up question, the meteor question is, were the new followers they acquired, did they cover the cost of what it took for them to be able to acquire those rights to begin with?
Yeah, great questions. I think that the WWE launch, I think, set record numbers as well on launch. So they are able to get the scale immediately on the platform for a dedicated audience base of several million. I think it was either 7 million or something like they achieved for opening night, although those numbers did drop significantly from the week thereafter. But obviously people are willing to log on and test out the viewing experience on those platforms. 19 million growth in a quarter is amazing stuff. It's worth noting that Netflix is going to stop publishing some of those subscriber numbers moving forward, which will really annoy a lot of analysts
Yeah.
across the industry. They'll come up with their own forms of metric, but obviously they are leaning more into advertising revenues as well. And that's where they can double dip so well. They can drive incredible audience acquisition, and they seem to have a really robust advertising and sponsorship offering for live sports already operating from the previous coverage that we've covered around some of their boxing and more premium events. So I think there was a line that one of the co-CEOs mentioned, which is the fact that they are really looking for events-based rights. They love the things that basically move the needle, and that makes a load of sense. Why just invest in something with a long tail where you can have things that drive customer acquisition so effectively? So that would mean that there's a good chance they are actively looking for those major tentpole annual and quadrennial events potentially. Could you see the Olympics getting onto the platform in the future? It would make some sense, and they've already started to weed out some of those challenges they've had from a technical standpoint. So, we don't see the nuance and the detail in the numbers, but ultimately it shows that there's a significant correlation in Netflix's growth in acquisition of audience alongside a major investment into sports, and that narrative will be really create a lot of buoyancy, I think, across the wider media industry to see that growth is correlated. Now, is it correlation or is it causation? That's a different question. We don't quite know. Like, what else have they been doing to drive that? But there's now comments from various media experts saying maybe the live sports investment is actually a more efficient way of driving acquisition for a streaming platform like Netflix, was historically it was the most expensive way of driving customer acquisition. So if that is the case, then yes, I think you could see that really driving a lot of interest and attention into from more major big tech and media outlets to drive subscriptions for those platforms as well. If we're back to sort of gone 180 on this and seeing that it is driving acquisition after all for subscription and ad funded models. So very exciting for the industry if it is as rosy as Netflix is presenting. The stock market's clearly reacted as such, that's for sure.
Well, you referenced it earlier. They do seem to be primarily interested in either U.S. sports or global deals. Like, even the NFL was a global deal. The WWE's global, but I would assume, they're already, geo-blocking content from different countries and what you can access from an entertainment perspective. There's nothing, I would think, in theory, that would stop them from doing something similar, kind of Amazon's approach, where Amazon was very, selective about which markets they would go in for select leagues, which you talked a little bit in the DAZN conversation. Like, I don't think that's, something that's out of their wheelhouse to be able to do something that specific and niche if they wanted to.
They can do whatever they want, and it will be successful, but effectively, because to some level of success, because they've already got scale in pretty much every major market. They've shown that they can deliver huge success in numbers in the most important media market. I just think whatever they do, that they've just shown they can turn it into gold pretty easily and pretty quickly because of the immense scale they have at their fingertips. And they're already driving up prices. Now they're going to be increasing the cost for subscribers, but they can do it because they're in the driver's seat. So whatever that, I'm intrigued to see if they do make a move into having more linear propositions alongside the live sporting experience. That would be a natural next step for them. But for now, they seem to have unlocked a new set of audiences because one of the concerns that we had and many industry analysts had, or I had, was, well, a lot of those people who are subscribing to alternative sports related streaming services are also already probably subscribed to Netflix. So why would they need to subscribe? Well, it just turns out there's enough out there that they can still drive a significant audience too. So they're absolutely hitting a home run at the moment. And it's interesting just because everyone talks about Netflix, and then you look at YouTube, it's a completely different business, yet absolutely dominating share of audiences as well. So a very interesting time to see how much they will dominate over the next 12 months. That is for sure.
Yeah, well, you raised the point about the prices going up, and when they were just raising the price, but they weren't necessarily, it was just the same product, like that felt a little whatever. But like, if now all of a sudden you are getting access to WWE, which is a global year round, content machine, you're getting just a couple of NFL games, and, they might do some more boxing matches. Like, it does start to justify the price a little bit. Like,
Yeah,
I don't think
sure.
I could be too mad about that individual price raise that they're doing there. And as you say, they're also adding in a completely new form of revenue with the ads that they get to run on that. And like all of a sudden, like that just starts to really tick over.
Yeah, they're in the prime position. I'd just be interested to see. There's so much more growth they can add to it. Ultimately, and that is the interesting bit: is how much more will they continue to do? Will they start adding their own shoulder programming? Will they extending into the linear space, or will they just keep taking this pure events based approach? How much do they want to own of the audience's attention, because they can just keep adding more layers and more layers to it now? They're in such a prime position. So yeah, full credit to them. And, but there's normally they are still, I think, the exception rather than the rule in a lot of instances, and that's where hopefully most of the industry has learned from for now. But we should take some buoyancy the fact that they've had such success delivering live sports, in my view.
And the last story we'll cover, we'll actually go back to your homeland and talk a little bit about the Australian Open, and specifically some of the things that they were doing from a streaming perspective, which was basically using Sims, the video game type characters, to broadcast. I think my understanding from that, Nick, was Australia Tennis lacked some of the rights domestically to be able to show everything. So what they couldn't show, they then did with the sort of alternative streaming using the Sims-like creation. We've seen some of this with the NFL. They did the Simpsons game the one time, I believe it was the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it's not necessarily brand new, but it is something that was new for this, and specifically done to overcome the fact that there was a lack of media rights. I think the NFL, when they've done it, was a bit more of, it's something new, let's attract some new audiences. This seemed to have a bit more of a strategic play around how do we fill the void of the lack of some rights. So that, I think, was an interesting approach. And for me, Nick, when I got my Jurgen Booster description nickname while we were out in Singapore, I was giving a Web3 sort of, what does it all mean? This was back in 2022, so 3 years ago, and I would sort of my opinion on everything. And I said, one of the things to look out for is potentially media rights. Could you sell a metaverse set of media rights that would sit outside of what was already carved out? And maybe I'm being proved right a little bit that you potentially could see something like that. But it is interesting nonetheless, because we know they did this specifically to overcome that challenge.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this type of experience that they've delivered is just to work out, actually look at the rights component of this, because I've talked to previous lawyers and other people in the industry to understand it all, because what basically they're needing to use, it's the data that's being produced from it. It's basically the data that is being produced out of various data outlets is normally the ones that are able to create these visual graphical experiences that they are producing. So it's not just like we're broadcasting a live event, this is what we're doing. It's using different tools and technology to deliver it, which just opens up a different conversation about, is it a data rights acquisition? So I'm buying the data access to create this content, or I'm actually having to do a media rights deal, because this adds some nuances on how it will be approached. It seems to create a lot of interest. It's a lot of fun. I don't know how much it's actually generated from an audience perspective. I think the numbers were significant, but how long watch times were and everything is unclear. I don't know if it's really watchable in a long term perspective, like watching an hour of that format. It's more like, that's cool, shows how you can bring data rights to life. I think if you get smart and crafty with it, and maybe that would sit great on like a betting platform to have, you go into want to bet on live on the match and you see this experience going on the platform. And maybe add some engagement for younger audiences on these platforms. But I don't know how much it can generate from a real financial perspective. And I think that's ultimately the question we're asking here. But it got a lot of coverage, a lot of attention, and it was pretty good. There was obviously some, tricky little bits of the broadcast that they did, which is where the ball gets stuck in certain places and then the racket doesn't look 100%. But by and large, it showed everything that they were doing. Even I think there was one clip going around of the broadcast where I think someone had a tantrum through their racket or something, and you can sort of see it going on in the visuals, which is pretty cool. So I do want to look more into it. I have half kicked the tires on that a bit more to understand the fact that it is sit as a sort of a different rights class in itself, potentially. But actually, when I talked to them, they weren't really sure. It was sort of sitting in this blurry middle ground. And that's where, the people like the NFL can just show off their wares and say to broadcasters, hey, buy this if you want, and probably charge a lot more money for it, or wrap it into a deal. And that's also why some of the media rights contracts are so enormous, because they might put protections in themselves to not allow other people to do this illegally. But no, it's definitely come a long way since the last time I've seen anyone try this sort of thing. So it's good fun.
Yeah, when I did my master's in sports law on the first day, the professor's like, "So is it sports law or is it law in sports?" And my whole interpretation was, "Well, it better be sports law because why am I paying for a degree if it's not a real thing?" But to your point, I think it's interesting, this idea of media rights versus data, where the legal system always catches up. We wouldn't have used to have computer law until computers were, and you're trying to take existing law to fill in the void of what doesn't exist there. I'm sure at some point we will get a hardline answer as to what that is, but I can understand where at the moment it is a little bit sort of in the middle of the two. But the thing I was thinking of as you were talking about that, it almost made me think, you're talking about media versus data, is those Cosm sports bars. Have you seen the ones out in LA?
Yeah.
Now,
they're
now
incredible.
that is live, but it's a different angle. It's not showing you the traditional sort of linear broadcast angle. And that was sort of what I was thinking a little bit with the metaverse, where it's like, if you're a season ticket holder, say whatever, you broke your leg, could you go in the metaverse and watch the game from your specific seat, which is a little bit more of that Cosm level. But to your point, that one probably is a media, not a data side, but you can start to see where this can all start to kind of trickle down to.
There's platforms like Roblox and the Metaverse and other and alike, where you could see this type of broadcast actually being plugged in properly and effectively, and engaging younger audiences, as everyone wants to do. And it was watchable for a period of time, not for the full experience. So, but that will come as technology continues to get optimized and more efficient. Things like tennis will get better and better. And as will other sports in being broadcast in that way. But I agree with you. I think you could see naturally then plugging that into a Roblox style platform and seeing some results there. Another platform we need to spend more time covering again. I think it seems to be getting more conversation again and again these days as well.
Well, Nick, it was great to have you back. I'm sure the audience, our fans, will be glad to have you back, and we will certainly bring more content. But yes, it's good to have you back with us once again, Nick.
Thanks very much, Chris. And obviously for those listening, thanks so much for all your support. And if you do have any ideas and thoughts of areas we should continue to look at or new areas to cover, please do get in touch with myself or Chris on social media and let us know what you think. Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.